welcome to this Fane online event in which I, Robert Elms, interview him, Martin Kemp.
Hey, nice to see you, Robert.
And to you, Martin. Because, of course, we're old mates.
Yep, and a long way back.
You know, the book is about the 1980s. And I presume we met in, what, 1979?
79, yeah. Yeah, it must have been, it was in the Blitz, wasn't it?
Or Billy's.
Billy's first.
Probably Billy's.
In Billy's. Yeah, I don't remember much about that. I mean,
It's in the book.
Well, I remember going to Billy's once.
Right,
You know, that was my experience of Billy's before the Blitz started, because Billy's didn't last that long, did it? It was only
a couple of months,
right?
But I met Gary definitely in Billy's.
Yeah, well, I went down with Gary, so we most probably met.
Yeah.
But Billy's was kind of the transition, wasn't it, between punk into New Romantics, or the Cult with No Name, or whatever you wanted to call it at the time. But it was the transition period. And Billy's wasn't really filled with the colour that the Blitz was. It was kind of that bit where in between, where it was more Bowie based.
It was very Bowie. It was also quite sort of edgy, because solo back then was really dodgy.
Really edgy. It was a horrible place to be, solo back then. Well, it was all sex clubs.
Yeah.
And, you know, everything had something to do with sex, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was either selling Super 8 movies that were sex, or you could literally go in and buy sex.
Yeah, or booths.
Yeah, booths. They used to go in and watch someone perform. You know, it was a horrible, seedy place, and that's what Billy's kind of was sat in the middle of all of that. But that's what, for me, made it exciting.
All right, let's go back. What are you like? I think the 1980s started in 1979. They started a year before.
Yeah, well, without a doubt. But I think it started at the end of punk.
Yeah.
You know, because punk was all about no future. It was all about destroy everything, bring everybody down. Yeah, bring everything down. It was all in black and white. And this is what I tried to get across in the book, was how when the 1980s came along, it was as if someone switched the colour switch on. And it was, I know in my house, we hadn't had a colour TV for that long before 1980. You know, in 1979, I think we just got the colour TV. It was the beginning of all the magazines turning from black and white, which was, let's say punk had Sniffing Glue, which was that fanzine, you know, that was all in black and white. NME was in black and white, everything. And then all of a sudden, 1980s came along, and all the magazines went to Smash Hits,
The
Record
Face.
Mirror and Colour, The Face, Blitz, the magazine Blitz.
Yeah, ID.
And all of that was in colour. So it was kind of like someone switched the colour switch on. And all that punk ethos of destroy everything and no future just turned into how we would, in the Blitz, me and you and all the people around us would talk about ambition, about what we wanted to do with our lives.
But in some ways, it was rather like punk, because it was about you can do it.
Yeah.
What punk said was, if you've got a guitar, you can form a band.
Oh,
you can start a
absolutely.
magazine.
Yeah.
You can start a clothes shop,
Yeah.
whatever you want to be. And it was that same kind of message. I always think of it as the generation who were just a bit too young for punk, whether it was Boy George or Steve Strange, you know, myself, Chris Sullivan, your brother. We were the ones at the very back, the little kids at the back.
I
during
was,
punk.
I was there.
You was about 15 or something.
Listen, and I'll tell you what, I was about 15, but I was looking through YouTube the other day, and there I am.
Where?
At a Generation X gig.
No.
Yeah. Film of me, 15-year-old me, a Generation X gig, pogoing.
Generation X were your favourite band, weren't they? In that
Without a
period?
doubt. But it was Generation X were the colour within punk, weren't they?
And they were kind of glamorous as
Poppy,
well.
yeah. Billy was like,
He was beautiful.
young Elvis.
Yeah.
He was the most beautiful little kid I've ever seen, you know.
All right. A couple of questions first.
Yeah.
How did a kid, you know, from working class Islington, and Islington then is not like Islington now, very, very different sort of place.
Yeah.
How did a kid from working class Islington first get into that world, you know, of people extravagantly dressed and nightclubs and it looks glamorous? And
I think I was dragged along by my brother at first, you know. I mean, because, you know, I'm the younger brother. Younger brothers always looked at their older brother to see what music they're buying, to see what album sleeves they're looking at. And, you know, I was influenced by Gary in a way that we used to share a bedroom when we were kids. And I would wake up every morning staring at his David Bowie posters on his bedroom wall, his side of the wall, where mine was all about football and Bruce Lee, you know. But so obviously I was influenced by what Gary was taking in as well. And so I remember the night that Gary first left me behind. And he went to see the Pistols at Screen on the Green.
that would have been a Screen on the Green, yeah.
Yeah, and I think Gary was 18 then, and I was 16, and my mum had asked me not to go.
Right.
So it was kind of like this this horrible gap had just opened up between us, where before, you know, Gary was always happy to take me along. And that was a big moment for me. And I think so when the Blitz came along, Billy's came along, it was a moment we could both share, because like I was, you know, 17 and Gary was 19 by then.
And you were already doing a bit of acting then, weren't you?
Yeah,
that had started already.
Yeah. I was acting since I was 9 years old.
Wow.
8 years old. By the time I was 15, I had a CV filled with 30 odd pieces that had been on TV, all those 1970s shows like Play for Today, Comedy Playhouse, Leonard Rossiter stuff, all of that.
So did you think you were going to be an actor?
Yeah, at first. And I enjoyed, do you know what I enjoyed most about it when I look back? That whole thing of being a kind of child actor was that it wasn't about me. It was being able to look at people around me at that time and realizing that you didn't have to go to work and not enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like my dad.
Yeah.
You know, that's what my dad was doing.
Yeah.
But all these people that were working on the films, on the sets, behind the cameras, people that were looking after me were enjoying their day's work. You know, so that was a massive eye-opener to me. And I think when it came to me going out to work for the first time and to kind of my ambition, it was my dad that opened that up to me. And it was my dad who said, take the time out, end up doing what you love doing, and you'll be far happier.
Do you think being an actor, in some senses, was kind of quite good training for going to the Blitz?
Oh, without doubt.
Because it was all about dressing up and posing and look at me and getting your place in the limelight.
Of course it was. Because at the Blitz, you know, it was all about us guys. You know, the whole piece of pop culture here was about there wasn't a uniform as there had been in the past.
People don't get that about the Blitz,
whether there was Teddy Boys, whether it was mods or rockers, or whatever, punks, there wasn't a uniform. We could turn up to a club, me and you, both wearing completely different things. You know, I'd be covered in taffeta and like some Stephen Jones hat.
Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, and you could be dressed as Frank Sinatra, but the two mixed and came together. And I think it was all about an ethos that was all about ambition, and that we all had that in common. And the ambition and the people that came out of that small group.
Incredible.
What, 120 people, right? At the most, at the core of that new romantic movement, that, right? What we went on to achieve affected the 80s.
I know.
And that's what I tried to get.
It kind of defined the decade.
Yeah.
I genuinely think that, you know, that group, that tiny group of people. But this has happened before. That happened with the Two Eyes in the 60s when you got Cliff Richard and Adam Faith all in one little coffee bar. And then even punk, there was a couple of little clubs where you got the Sex Pistols and the Clash. And it happened again at the Blitz.
Oh, but ours was wider in a way, because within our club, when I was writing this, it kind of was occurring to me all the time, you know, if you wanted there was one moment in time in the Blitz where you could just dream of what you wanted to be and it would happen.
Yeah.
It was just like that. If you wanted to be in a pop band, it would happen. If you want to be a journalist, it would happen.
Clothes designer.
Clothes designer. There was video directors. There were people running clubs. And what we could do within there is that we kept everything in-house. You know, there was Graham Smith to design your record covers. There was
Melissa Kaplan.
Melissa Kaplan.
You can't put on.
Everything you needed. I've still got one at home, 12 pieces, and I still don't know how to wear it. Honestly. But whatever you needed within, like, the entertainment business, support structure was all inside the Blitz.
But it was kids.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that's extraordinary about the Blitz is almost no one was over the age of 25. No, if that.
That's right.
Most of them were teenagers.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people looked older than that.
Yeah, but Christos looked about 48. Let's talk about Steve Strange, because you talk about Steve a lot.
I love Street.
And I do think, you say you love him, it was kind of a love affair, wasn't it, in some ways?
Yeah, without a doubt. You know, I mean, I even dedicated the book to Steve because it's what I said in there. You know, I think he ended up, without knowing it, styled so many lives, you know, not just the way we looked in the 80s, but the way he gave people ambition. He opened doors to so many people, you know, that you only have to look at the amount of bands that did well
Yeah.
from that club,
Yeah.
you know, which is just ridiculous. You know, when we Ultravox, Spandau, you know, you could go on
Boy
and on.
George.
Boy George, who worked in the cloakroom.
In some senses, you could say Bananarama, Sade,
Yeah.
Wham. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's a whole list.
It went on and on and on. And how you and all of those bands owe the same to Steve, I think. But, you know, if it wasn't for Steve taking the initiative and opening that club up, I don't think we would have all come together.
Let me ask you a question that occurred to me when I was reading, which is that, you know, you're a 17, 18-year-old kid, as we said, from a working class, very sort of traditional background. And you're out there with someone like Steve Strange, who's very flamboyant, very gay, very...
Yeah.
How did you first... What were your feelings when you first...
It was a strange thing. You know, I remember the first time I ever saw Steve Strange was at a Generation X gig.
Right.
And he was standing on the side of the stage, right? And he was kind of like too far on the stage, really. And all I remember is now I'm looking at Billy Idol, one of the most charismatic frontmen ever.
Yeah.
And Steve Strange, standing on the side, stole the show. I could not take my eyes off of Steve. Like this huge black quiff that he used to have, that's standing like a foot up in the air, you know, giant padded shoulders, covered in like cigarette smoke that was like, it looked like a magician's trick that it just got, someone had just gone, and there he is. And I couldn't take my eyes off him. And so the first time that I ended up going to Billy's and the Blitz, meeting Steve, there was something about him that attracted me. And I suppose when I look back at it, you know, I'm questioning my own sexuality.
That's what I'm saying. Were you confident in your sexuality?
Oh, yeah.
Because you talk about him
confident.
holding your hand and there's a sort of
listen, Steve never stopped trying to pull me until the day that he passed, you know. That is a fact. But
that wasn't, you see, you can't look at that through the prism of today because it was very different, wasn't it? I mean, people were still being beaten up on the streets for being gay. It was tough, you know.
But it was a wonderful way to grow up.
Yeah.
Because what it did for me was just open my eyes up to everything. Yeah. It was,
and you accepted all that immediately.
Accepted everything. What you accepted was that people were allowed to be whoever they wanted to be.
That's really important.
Yeah, and it's what was kind of like became part of my soul, and it's something that I'm lucky enough to have been handed down to my kids as well. Something that I've learned, and that's what it was in the Blitz. It was about. And the 80s, it was about people who were allowed to be who they wanted to be. If you wanted to turn up one day looking like John Wayne, you were allowed to do that. If you wanted to turn up looking like a spaceman, you were allowed to do that. But as long as you were living out being the star of your own movie for that evening,
I had one of those PX tops that Steve sold me with the big padded shoulders, and he described it to me as a space Cossack. Quite what a space Cossack is, I've got no idea.
Yeah, exactly.
But I was a space Cossack for a day.
I think the first time I ever met Steve, he was something along the lines of a space cowboy. Yeah, you know, and Steve was brilliant. You know, he was the perfect close horse for PX. Wasn't he?
He was fantastic
when he used to work in there.
So you're now becoming one of the faces at the Blitz, and you were, because, you know, I was there every Tuesday night, and it was a small coterie of people, and you and your mate Christos, who you'd both been to school together, I think, were the two sort of youngest, really, but both really striking looking and really well dressed. Was it a big leap from there to being in the band?
No, it kind of all rolled on, to be honest. And
so how did that come about? Because you weren't originally in the band, were you?
No,
in
absolutely.
the earlier incarnations.
I was originally when Gary was. It was Gary's band. He was a school band. They used to rehearse in the school music room, and go out and play at weekends to like 50 of their mates at a local pub. And so I was roadieing for them, carrying the equipment, and it was something that I always hated because you know I was so jealous. Robert, I can't tell you. You know, I used to go to bed just hoping and dreaming that something terrible was going to happen to one of them, so I could stand in. You know, and it's the truth. And it wasn't until one evening, which I remember clearly. I was standing next to Steve Dagger, Steve Norman's, who is also the saxophone player in the band. Steve Norman's 18th birthday party, and Steve said something to me that changed my world. Steve Dagger, opened up my world, and he asked me to be in the band. And he said, we're going to get rid of the old bass player. I want you to be the bass player. I want you to be in the band if we ever make it to Top of the Pops. I want you to be with us. And my world just absolutely changed, you know. And I was I'm a big believer in that you only get moments of opportunity like that 3 or 4 times in your life, where you can walk through and you choose, do I go left or do I go right? And if you get it right, then your life changes forever.
Because I've got my equivalent Steve Dagger story.
Yeah.
Because I'm at university with Steve. We're both at the LSE. And he says to me one day, Gary's got this band. They're going to be really big and you're going to write reviews and you're going to become a famous journalist.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'll get out of it, Steve. You know what he's like. He sort of talks like that, very matter of fact. So I did the first review of Spandau Ballet. Yeah. And I wrote it on hand, like school notepaper in a pen, round his mum and dad's council flat in Oban. Yeah, yeah. And he then walked me from there to the NME, said, go up there and give it to them. And, we'll end up on Top of the Pops and you'll end up as a famous journalist.
It's amazing.
And it happened.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think what Steve Dagger doesn't get, the pat on the back that he should do for all of that era, because he orchestrated so much of it.
Absolutely.
Putting people together, and the way that, we already had a band by the time I was going into the Blitz. Yeah. But we kept it quiet. And Steve did not want anyone to know that we had this band going, that it was called Gentry or what we was doing with it. He just said, just put it on ice for a little while. Let's all become part of this new pop culture, this movement. And then we'll announce it later on when we've got it perfect. And so it was all Steve's doing, and then once the band did happen, I think Steve was orchestrating lots of things that were going on within the Blitz. And what I used to love the most when I look back at Steve Dagger now is that he was the oracle within the Blitz. He was the fanzine. Like he knew everything that was going on. He knew who was sleeping with who. He knew who was doing what.
He must have had charts.
Yes, where you'd been at the weekend, what party you'd crashed, and he knew all of that. And I remember on a Tuesday evening, you would sit with Steve and catch up on the whole deal. And he was great at telling his stories. And so he was like the equivalent to sniffing glue, not literally, but the magazine sniffing glue, where you'd get all your local information.
Okay, so you've been asked to join this band. Yeah. And then Steve finally kind of lets word out that it exists. Yeah. And you have that gig, and you mentioned, again, you talk about it a lot in the book. You have that gig on a sort of Saturday morning.
Yeah. Well, it was more of a, I always look back at that gig,
because Gary says it was the most important gig you ever played.
Most important gig ever. Absolutely. More important than Live Aid, all of them, the biggest gig we ever did. And it was important because we invited probably 15 people down.
A dozen, I've always said.
Right? A dozen people down. But it was the most important people. It was yourself, or Chris Sullivan. It was Steve Strange and Rusty was there, I think.
Rusty was there.
And so it was us kind of introducing ourselves to the guys that run
the kind of the in crowd.
The in crowd. And in a way that what we were looking for is to say, this is the band that could represent that movement. But really it balanced on a knife edge, because if we were rubbish that day, it wouldn't have worked. But it did work. And yourself, everybody enjoyed what we did. And then Steve Strange asked us to do the first gig
at the Blitz.
And it took off from there, But
and that's where the name came from as well.
The name is down to you,
Well, me and Chris Sullivan, actually, because it was Chris. Both of us were in the same toilet in Berlin. Don't ask why.
No, that's right. Yeah.
And we saw Spandau Ballet written on the wall. And either I said to him or he said to me, that's a good name for a band. Yeah. And we just sort of carried this around. Yeah. And so when we went that day and Steve said they're called the Gentry, and I went, yeah, that's not a very good name.
Well, it was a power pop name.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't right for what you'd become.
No, absolutely.
And so I suggested Spandau Ballet either to Steve and Gary, I think, and it was born.
Yeah, well, we'd spent the previous 3 or 4 months stripping out all the lead guitar bits out of all the songs and replacing them with synths. Yeah. A new synthesizer.
Well, you talk about to cut along. So
Well, that was a guitar riff, And then all of a sudden the synth comes in. And it's on this monophonic synth, because that's all we could get then, one single note at a time. And it sounded amazing. But that was another thing that happened in the 80s that you have to look at. Technology with the sounds that you could create as a band were just huge. You went from late 70s punk bands that were basic rock and roll bands into this thing called the synthesizer that had just been pretty much invented. And at the time, you could only get the single monophonic stuff. But it changed everything, changed all the sounds. And there was a moment that I always thought Spandau are going to be the first with this new sound, with this new synth sound that's, it's going to change everything. Everyone's going to copy it. And then just before we released, to cut a long story short, I remember coming home from a holiday and walking up the stairs to my mum and dad's house, and I can hear Gary Newman.
I was going to say that, Gary Newman.
Right? Our Friends Electric on Top of the Pops. My heart just sank.
Really?
Sank.
You thought he'd been beaten to it?
I thought we'd be beaten to the post. And it was brilliant as well, that Our Friends Electric.
But there was that, it was a sound, wasn't it? And the reason that the name Spandau Ballet went with it, because there was a sort of a Germanic thing. Bowie had been in Berlin.
Yeah.
There was that kind of, and that craft work, it was that sort of sound, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean.
But also it was danceable.
Of course, but it was what Rusty was playing at the Blitz.
Absolutely.
Is where we were going.
Yeah.
All of that kind of Germanic sound and kind of that hard synth sound that we were looking at, and playing lots of Bowie and Roxy music. But the funny thing about Bowie that I always think is that the club started off as a Bowie night, right? Billy started off as a Bowie night, and that kind of transferred into the Blitz. So it was kind of like a Bowie-based club to start off with. Yeah. And then, so it was Bowie that got it going. And I always thought the end to the Blitz was when Bowie came down to the club and asked Steve Strange and Judith to be in the video, Ashes to Ashes.
Yeah, I was there.
And that was the moment for me, when that was on Top of the Pops, it finished. Because we'd kind of, it almost,
gone full circle.
Yeah, it almost opened the doors and let the oxygen into a tomb, and it started to rot.
When you make, or you release, to cut a long story short, and you're on Top of the Pops, and did that feel like you'd done it?
No, it felt like it was. It felt like it was an achievement to be there. Top of the Pops was the big thing, but it didn't feel like I'd achieved anything.
Really?
Because when you're young, you're always looking ahead, aren't you?
Yeah.
You always think, when I get to Top of the Pops, that will be it. But by the time you get to Top of the Pops, your ambition has gone beyond that, and you want to sell out Hammersmith Odeon, right? And then by the time you get to Hammersmith Odeon, your ambition's gone beyond that.
You're Wembley.
You're at Wembley. And in your head, by the time you get to Wembley, you're at Wembley Stadium. So you can never quite catch up. It's only when you get older, like us, that your ambition starts to settle and you start to think of the good times. And when you achieve those moments, you stand back and you breathe them in.
Were you enjoying it at the time?
Yeah, I loved it. Absolutely loved it. From being a 17-year-old kid, I signed the record contract with Spandau on my 18th birthday.
Wow.
18 with a bullet, right? I was up and running. And, from my 18th birthday, the next thing I knew, we were sitting on Learjets flying around Europe.
Did you have to pinch yourself, or did it sort of seem natural and normal and inevitable?
Yeah, it seemed kind of normal.
Because that's what seems, looking back now for me,
Yeah.
and I'm in the centre of all of this, and you lot are doing this, and Sade's doing that, and Blue One doing I never questioned it. No. It just seemed absolutely, almost inevitable.
Yeah, it's about, I think, because the way that we, the way that our brains worked inside the Blitz was we expected it to happen. And when you expect something to happen, by the time you're doing it, it's not such a big shock because you've lived it in your brain so many times. I used to sit at school, in my secondary school, dreaming that I was going to be in the Rolling Stones. Dreaming. Literally, my secondary school years were wasted because I just used to dream about being in a band. So by the time it actually happened, it was like I'd already been there, and I was just living out what I should be living out. But listen, that's not to say that I didn't appreciate it. Sure. I appreciated every moment I was doing it.
Were there difficulties? Were there tough bits?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough living with a band. It's tough, because you share every moment of the day together. At the beginning, we had the best of times. We laughed and we were the best of mates.
Well, up until what point?
Well, up until I suppose you'd been around the world about 3 times, and then someone comes up to you on the 4th time and says, "Here's your ticket. You're going around the world again." Yeah. And when you should have gone, yeah, that's good. You start going, I've got a family. I've got my kids and my wife, and I don't want to leave home anymore, because you've done it and you've seen it, and the excitement kind of starts to drop out of it. But But, you know, the band Spandau, you know, we had an incredible run. It was, what, 10 years?
You made, I think, a conscious decision, and absolutely the right decision, to kind of, having become the band of the Blitz and the trendiest band in London, which would have meant the trendiest band in the world at that moment in time, to then sort of leave that behind. Do you remember, was that a decision?
Yeah, it was a decision.
Was it?
Absolutely.
Did you have a band meeting and say, right?
No, but it was a natural progression.
Yeah.
But it was a decision that we all made without talking about it. And it happened because Journeys to Glory came out, and which was a big record, but it was only a big record through Britain, really, little parts of Europe, you know. So it didn't sell enough to make us rich. It didn't say, I'm still living at home with my mum and dad, you know, so it was just about enough money to get by. And then Diamond came out, which didn't do that well. No. You know, the numbers on the tracks that were coming out were really low. They were, you know, it was only chart number 1 that we released off the album that kind of saved us. You know, when I look back, the second side on Diamond, I don't know where we were coming from, you know, but it was difficult. It was a difficult time. And you're always trying to catch your tail as well, because you're looking at bands around you that are new on the scene, but are doing better than you as well. But it eats away at you a little bit, you know. But going back to your question, was that we knew after Diamond that we had to change direction.
Got to do something else.
Could not be that cult band anymore that just plays to those guys in the club. Couldn't do that.
I think you talk about chart number 1, you know, which we just mentioned, and particularly the video that goes with that. Yeah. In some ways, I think if someone wants to understand the 1980s, have a look at that video.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the most 1980s moment of the war.
Yeah. Well, we were all in there.
I know, exactly.
It was everybody in the club that used to go to
this club called the Beetroot in Soho.
Turn up to shoot the video.
Yeah.
And it's a moment, absolutely brilliant. Even George Michael is in that video.
Yeah.
Everybody's there. And it's a perfect moment in time. Girls from Bananas are there, and everybody, Ollie on the door saying welcome in. It's a perfect moment in time. I love that. Out of all the videos we shot, that's absolutely my favourite.
Is it? Even though you'd have spent a lot more on one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Did you like making videos? Was that a good thing for you?
It was a thing that I don't really know, because I wasn't really in them. For some reason, you know, back in the day, it was all about the singer, and it was all about the singer's story. So you'd have the singer, like Tony, doing his acting stuff inside the video, and then you'd be singing the song. And I knew when it got to the videos, I was going to be like used for 2 minutes, you know. But listen, I never minded that, because I always felt that a band has to be kind of like 5 small cogs inside a box that makes up this brilliant machine, right? And so as long as you were confident with what you were doing inside that band, and I knew what my role was. My role wasn't to be the best musician, to be the best bass player, to write the songs. My role was to be on the front cover of the magazine, right?
It's always struck me as kind of analogous a bit to, say, Paul Simon in The Clash.
Yeah, it was a little bit like that.
Do you know what I mean? A similar kind of role. The style of the band, the look of the band is partly his kind of thing.
There was me and John
Joe
Taylor
as the front man.
Yeah, me and John Taylor. You know, I thought our roles in both bands were pretty much the same.
Yeah.
You know, we weren't great musicians, but we were there for a reason. And I thought my cog inside that big machine, because Spandau Ballet, was to be on the front covers, which I'm going to be really honest, you know, I didn't find satisfying at all.
Didn't you?
No, because
not feeding your vanity.
It wasn't feeding anything artistic in me at all.
I got you on that front cover.
But it wasn't feeding me like artistically, you know. This was what you have to understand, and I talk about it a lot in the book, is it was Gary's band. You know, it was Gary's band. It was Gary's songs. It was Gary was doing it how he wanted to do it and molding the band how he wanted to be. And let's face it, he was absolutely brilliant with it. You know, his songs were fabulous. You know, so for me, it was always kind of like a struggle and a catch up. It wasn't like I was one of the boys in the band. I was enjoying the moment, but it wasn't kind of feeding me artistically. It wasn't until much later on when I think I left the band, right, in the end of the 80s, that I started to kind of like feel that I was doing something artistic. No. And there was a really huge
Not even when you're playing live?
No, not really, because that was about, playing live is a little bit like doing a theatre show. You know, once you do it once, you walk through the motions and you know exactly where you're going to be at a certain times.
Yeah.
I've always kind of like thought of it as like the analogy, like I always felt like doing those big gigs, you're like a Subutio goalie on a stick that gets pushed out and pushed around, and you know exactly where you're going after the first month, and so the fun goes out of it and you're just going through the motions, you know. But there was a big moment, a big turning point that I think my artistic side came alive, and that was when the end of the 80s, when we were talking about doing the Kray twin film, and Anna Scher's, first thing we did, we went back to Anna Scher, my old drama teacher from when I was a kid in Islington. And we said, me and Gary both went there, said, can we have some refreshers, you know? And so she sat us on the floor and said to us, right, I want you to both go back to being 2 and 3 years old, push your little cars around on the floor, talk to each other and look at each other in the eye and forget all of Spandau. Really? Leave it all behind. And me and Gary spent about half an hour pushing these little make-believe cars around on your mum's swirly carpet that they used to have in the 80s, making out they were roads, you know, and talking to each other as if we were little kids. And all of that got left behind. And there was a moment in that Gary first said to me, he looked at me, he said, am I doing it all right? That was the first moment I think Gary in his life had ever said to me, am I doing it all right? And it was the first time that we were both on this level.
You were equals.
We were equal. And so I got more out of that than I did at any time.
All right, we'll come on to the Krays in a bit, but let's go back to, say, Live Aid.
Yeah.
Because for many people, that's going to be the defining moment or gig of the 1980s.
It was, absolutely.
But it was, but not if you were there.
Yeah.
I was there for a bit with Sade, and then it was just this blur, and then I was backstage, and then we went home, and then I didn't even realise it was a big thing.
Yeah. See, I did the same. I went home halfway through, and then I come back.
Did you?
So, yeah, I came back. I came back just in time to see Queen, which was the best thing of the day. But it was the 80s. When you look back at it, it was pre-Live Aid and post-Live Aid. Yeah. You know, and a lot of people, when they say, oh, the 80s, they were the golden years, what a great decade, they're talking about pre-Live Aid. Yeah. You know, post-Live Aid was kind of, it all got a little bit poppy and kind of back into the arenas, and it kind of like what we moved on from. But Live Aid was an amazing moment in time.
Were you aware of it at the time?
Yeah. I think it was the first time it had happened to me. And, you know, usually things become historical in retrospect.
Yeah, of course.
When you look back at them.
Yeah.
But Live Aid was historical during the moment while we were doing it. We all knew it was. With 2 billion people watching it around the world, it had to be. You know, it was the biggest concert that had ever happened. So you knew what you were in the middle of. And there's a great Spandau moment. It just shows you where we were at. Because where our egos were at the time. We've made that classic mistake, right? 2 billion people around the world, 100,000 people in Wembley. And Tony goes up to the mic and he goes, here's a new one. You can feel 2 billion people go, oh, really? But it's kind of like, I love that moment because it kind of shows where our egos were.
Were you aware of having a big ego?
Oh, absolutely. And I knew, like, when it got to, I think by the time we were recording the Band-Aid record, our egos had literally left the planet for a while. And but I look back at that and I'm glad I did, because I would not like to have sat here now and not said that I enjoyed every moment. And our egos did get big. You know, when we made classic mistakes. I'll give you an example. So I talk about in the book, and it's turning up for the Band-Aid recording, right? So we get a call the night before from Bob Geldof to say we're in Germany, right? And to say come and record this record. It's going to be a charity record, so no one really knows what's going on. But Steve Dagger came into us. He said, "Yeah, tomorrow we're flying home because we're going to record the Band-Aid single in Notting Hill, right, Sun West." And so straight away we hire a Learjet. Duran, who were also on the coming home to do the gig, hire a Learjet, because we're always in competition with one another. Even that becomes competition, right? So who could land first? It becomes like a race in Learjets to get back to Notting Hill. So as we get there, so we land and we get to Notting Hill. Now, Bananarama had turned up in this tiny, small Volkswagen. They all get out of there, right? Like smoke pouring out even as they open the doors. There was Paul Weller, who had come walking along with his Guardian tucked under his arm. And there was Spandau, who turned up in this great big fuck off limousine, right? One the Queen would use, like a Daimler, you know, massive thing. And so we turn up, don't worry, it's all going to be all right. You know, Spandau are here, all the problems are put them to one side, forget about all that. And so, and you've got lines of the kids screaming, and you've got your lines of the photographers and the people doing it, journalists doing interviews. And one of the journalists came up to one of the guys in the band, who I will keep anonymous, and he said, have you got anything that you can say to the poor people of Ethiopia? And he goes, yeah, I'd just like to say, sorry we couldn't get down there this year, but we will try and tour next year.
Now I know who said that.
Yeah, you know,
I won't say
yeah. But it just, I love that story because it's just really,
it just shows
where our heads were at, you know, where our heads were at.
At this stage, you've already met your missus, haven't you?
Yeah.
Did she not try and say to you,
no,
your head's getting a bit big?
No, because hers was big as well. She was with Wham. No, well, she was off touring the world with Wham, you know, so she was doing that, and I was doing my thing. So I suppose in our house, you know, it's lucky we both fitted in, really. but you know, I remember seeing George down at Live Aid, and he had just released his the Last Christmas song as well, and he was saying, "Oh, this Band Aid song, it's not going to work. You know, don't like the lyrics to it. They're all depressing. You know, you need to bring it up more." And so, you know, maybe you got it wrong. That one.
George Michael was also a big mate of yours, wasn't he?
Yeah, big mate. Yeah, well, we're not so much a mate. He was like more part of our family. You know,
really.
You know, he was Shirley's schoolboy friend.
Yeah.
So he became part of our family group, really, and. He was one of the loveliest men, you know. I'm talking about. He got it wrong with Band Aid, right? I got it wrong with one of his records once. I went over to his house one evening, right, and you know, we were having a few drinks and stuff, and I left my coat there, and so in the morning I had to get Shirley to drive me back to his house to pick up my coat. And so he opens the door and he said to me, "Come in, I want to show you something." So we go up to his bedroom. And he plays "Wake Me Up Before You Go Go." And I'm looking at him going, yeah, right. I'm saying all the right things. Yeah, that's great. What a great record that is. That's smash. I say, "See you later." Goes downstairs, go back to the car where Shirley is. And I look at Shirley and goes, "It's all over." Terrible. So I completely got that one wrong as well. So it was 1-1.
You've spoken about Duran. How real was that sort of Duran and Spandau thing? Or was that just kind of playing up to the gallery?
I think it was Dagger who invented it. Because he loved that whole idea that, you know, it's brilliant being in one of those bands that have got that rivalry, whether it's Blur and Oasis, whether it's the Stones and the Beatles, you know, it goes back years and years. And the idea that Duran and Spandau had this rivalry was just huge. And it kind of played on itself, and it kind of like took on its own form in a way. But it kind of affected us as people as well, because the rivalry wasn't just about what number your record is in the charts. You know, it was really pathetic things like being at a party with them once, I remember, and it came down to who could drink the most and who could stay up the latest.
John Keeble.
Yeah, John Keeble, hands down. But it was pathetic as well, really? You know, and it all kind of like came to a head when we played that great pop quiz moment in the 80s, Spandau versus Duran. And to this day, I still believe they cheated.
When you look back at the period when you're at the height of all of that, do you look back on it and laugh, smile? Do you think, oh, God blimey, that jacket's a bit dodgy?
I look back and I absolutely, with endearment, and it's just a moment I love looking back at. It was the 80s was the decade that made me as a person, I think. It makes me smile. You
mentioned the Kray twins earlier on, and obviously that's when, I guess it must be bittersweet that for you, because it's, you know, a fantastic acting role. You're doing something that you really feel is creative and challenging, but it's also kind of the end of the band in some ways.
Yeah, but I knew the band was coming to an end anyway.
Did you?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that its shelf life was already gone and dusted.
Was that because of internal stuff, or
No,
because you'd done what you could do? Or?
Before our last album, Heart Like a Sky, Gary and I were down with my mum and dad in Bournemouth, and we were walking along the beach, sandbanks, and Gary said to me, I don't want to make another album. I'm moving on. I want to do my own thing. Because he was fed up with the politics of the band and how it was working and the arguments within the band. He was fed up with that. And he said he wasn't going to carry on. And I literally broke his arm and legs to get him to do another album. And when I look back in retrospect, I shouldn't have done. I should have let him go with it. I should have had more confidence in moving forward. But when you've been doing something for like 10 years, it's a scary moment to say, I'm not going to do that anymore, especially if you don't know what you're going to do after that. So I kept it going for another album. And it was that extra album, I think, that the band suffers from today, that caused kind of where we started to fall apart as friends.
The tensions between Gary and Tony had always been there, though.
Yeah. But there was a moment that I would never forget, which was the Gene moment. Right, we were shooting we were doing a photo session for Raw, right, one of the final singles, and Tony turned up in a pair of jeans that Gary didn't like, and he said to Tony, "Why have you worn these jeans? What are they? Gap?" And Tony goes, "No, they're Marks and Spencer." But listen, that's how it is in my brain anyway, right? I'm not sure that's exactly the words they used, but that's how it was. But it wasn't about the jeans. It was about everything. And it was the way the last album was made completely different to the rest, where before it was all about all of us putting in input and me putting in lines of this is how I'm going to play the bass, or Tony would say this is how I'm going to sing it, where this was the first album that I think Gary had brought down to a rehearsal room already made in demos. Yeah. And it was almost like, copy this. So I wished we hadn't have made that last album, because we could have ended up, we would still be talking today. But, as it is, I talk to all of them, but the relationship isn't what it should be.
Yeah. And when there was that late comeback with someone other than Tony singing, it didn't work.
No, not at all. It was never going to work. Tony's the only singer that should be in the band.
And his voice is so integral to that sound.
He had the best voice of the 80s, without a doubt. He's got absolutely beautiful voice. But it was something that we did that kind of regrouping, trying to find another singer. I think it was more out of frustration than it was about literally trying to do it, because Tony had walked away from the band on the previous tour, and it was more, we felt like we had more to do. But looking back on it, listen, you make mistakes. You put your hands up sometimes and you say there are mistakes.
Let's talk about the Krays, because I think it still really stands up as a movie, as performances. Was it daunting? Because it's it's a big movie and it's relying on you to, but also because you're playing some real life people who are the Kray twins.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of daunting in the way that the myth and legend was so big within the area I grew up, like North London. Yeah. So I always felt like I was representing my district by playing Reggie Kray, and it was kind of daunting.
You got to meet him, didn't you?
Not Reggie.
Oh no,
Reggie. I didn't. I got to meet Ronnie. Yeah, I went into Broadmoor to meet Ronnie one morning, which was the most bizarre thing. Because going into any prison is bizarre, right? But going into Broadmoor, it's a hospital, so and the patients remain in there. Right, and but they're allowed to wear their own clothes, and so it's kind of much more relaxed. And I remember sitting there talking to Ronnie, going in, sitting there and talking to Ronnie, and looking round. And as I'm talking to him about murder, right, and about all the people that he killed, and about the people he wanted to kill if he ever got out, I look round and the Yorkshire Ripper is sitting there as well. No. Yeah, I'm just like surrounded by it. But what made it even more bizarre was that morning, I'd been on Saturday Morning Superstore, so it was kind of like from the sublime to the ridiculous. But Ronnie was really good. He said, you can ask me whatever you want. You can, I'm going to tell you the truth.
In his high-pitched voice.
Yeah. And it was the strangest thing, right? Because no one warned me about You know, when I went to see Ronnie, I always thought he was going to talk to me, like, speak a little bit like Danny Dyer, like a geezer, you know. But when you get there, hello, how you doing? He had a high-pitched voice. I'm really pleased you two are playing me. And I'm looking at him thinking, is he winding me up? And it wasn't. That's who it was.
Did it feel that you'd come full circle to acting when you did that?
Yeah. It felt like I'd gone home and found myself. Because I was acting so much when I was a kid, you know, I spent 8 years doing television bits and pieces and as a child actor, it becomes part of me. And when I first went to drama club, Anna Scher's drama club, I was so shy. It was like almost painful, the shyness that I used to have. And so I think when I went there, my mum put me in that Anna Scher's children's theatre. I was like a piece of blotting paper, ready to soak up any personality that I was given. And I think what happened was acting became a part of my personality rather than a skill that I was learning. It became part of me. So it's something that I can go to at any time and turn on and off.
What do you think of yourself as now? Actor or musician or
no, entertainer.
Entertainer?
Yeah, entertainer. I mean, that's what
like Matt Spygraves.
Yeah. But that's what I do. You know, you entertain everything that I do, whether it's directing films or presenting or acting in whatever films or TV. It's all about entertainment. You know, that's what it is.
And you've done an awful lot since then. I mean, I won't run through the CV. So why that period? Why the 80s for this book?
The 80s. 80s was ticket to the world. You know, this was the moment in my life that everything opened up. It's why I said, you know, I was 18 when I signed that record contract at the beginning of the 80s. And it was 18 with a bullet. It was the doors to me for the world opened up. And I really was, you know, through that whole decade, it was like a kid being in a sweet shop. It was what we were talking about earlier. We went through a period in the Blitz where whatever you imagined could come true. Yeah. Whether you wanted to be a graphic designer, journalist, anything.
Do you not think it's really interesting that for a long time people kind of sneered a bit about the 80s and they laughed at the shoulder pads and the hair and the makeup and the synth drums or whatever it was. Suddenly now there's a generation of kids out there who look back and go, that must have been incredible.
I'll tell you something. I go out and I do DJ 80s 3 times a week. And I've done it for the past four years. And I go out, play to 1,000 people, right? 1,000 people in each hall are singing at the tops of their voices, absolutely loving it, right? And it's the most euphoric thing I have ever been involved in my life. And it's about why you feel good. You know, when you sing openly at the top of your lungs, you get this adrenaline that you don't ever experience. And that's why people who go to football, blokes that go to football sing, people who go to church sing and feel great afterwards. But people who come along to those 80s nights and they sing at the top of their lungs, they walk away going, what is this thing I've got inside me? And it's adrenaline. It's a euphoria that they haven't felt for ages. And it is the most wonderful thing I do. And people look back now at the 80s as if this was the moment in their life, the biggest decade in their life. Like my mum and dad used to talk about the best decade in their lives was the 60s. Yeah. You know, that was the moment, their golden era. But for us now, it's the 80s.
Well, if people want to know about the 80s,
it's
all in there. Ticket to the World, Martin Kemp, My 80s Story. Martin, it's been such a pleasure going over all this.
Thanks, Bob.